All right, guys, so when you're building floors and all the sheet metal that you're seeing me do right now on the Comet, it's not just a matter of bead rolling cool patterns into stuff. So the main thing that you want to do when you start kind of laying all this stuff out is you have to define usable space. So what we're talking about is when you're building all that stuff, you have to think about everything that's going to go into the car after you build all the structure, right? So we're talking master cylinders on the firewalls, where your electrical box is going to mount, how much clearance do you have for all your shift linkages on the trans, how much clearance do you have for your headers and exhaust to sleep by, is there enough room for the pedals to be where they're supposed to be when you're sitting in the car? Is it going to chafe against your legs? How high do the seats need to be? Can you have a good line of sight? All of those things are things that you have to take into consideration, right? When you're building your trans, your drive shaft covers, you have to make sure that you have proper clearances for your transmission so you don't have any buzzing or anything, but also where are your cup holders going to be and is it going to interfere with the drive shaft? Oh, and the drive shaft, the headers and exhaust system, that all going to be able to tuck underneath where it's supposed to go. And when you look underneath the car, is the bottom of the car going to be flat and nothing sticking down below it? So obviously there's a lot of stuff going on when you lay this stuff out. If you come over to this 34, we did this in a workshop, and one of the things we talk about is defining what you can and can't use. So for instance, I've got my steering column coming through here. Normally the master cylinder would be underneath the car, but on a modern one it'll probably be up here somewhere. We're going to have room for our electrical box down here. So what that does is that tells me where I can put bead rolls in the design. So what I'll do is I'll block off the things that I have to have and then make my designs around them purely for the aesthetics, right? So same kind of deal, you have to think about which way your beads are going, so on and so forth. Sometimes I like to do my beads moving down if we're in the cabin, so it gives you a little bit more clearance. Sometimes I like them to go in like this on a firewall, give you more room for the motor, the transmission. And then sometimes up in the toe boards, I like to do raised beads that come up to give you a little bit of traction somewhere to get your heel when you're trying to push on pedals, right? So there's a whole bunch of designing and engineering that goes in with it. So in terms of traditional hot rods, there's almost never any space inside these because, let's face it, they just built cars smaller back then, right? So when I lay something out like this, I have to decide, is it going to be bucket seats? Is it going to be bench seats? How much room do you have to get your feet in over on by the pedals? Which you can't really drive these cars wearing DCs, right? You're going to have to wear small shoes. They're just small cars. Same thing, I want this to be down on the chassis much lower, so the back section has this kick up here to allow for the rear end, meaning that my drive shaft trans cover has to die out through there. So all of these things that I'm thinking about. And then same thing, when you're laying out these patterns, you're not just laying out what looks cool, because if you do that, then when you come back in and try to put like seat mounts or things like that, you might have irregularities that just make things more difficult for yourself. So I'm a huge advocate of thoughtful engineering. Another thing to consider is aesthetics and how they present, right? This gets into show car territory, which is basically what we build. It's just high-end stuff that shows really well everywhere and all the details matter. So when you're looking at this car, all the floors and things that I'm building, once this is all done, it will be pretty, but eventually this is all going to get covered with glue and sound deadening and carpet and seats, and you'll never see any of this. Now in my shop, that doesn't matter. The rule is everything matters whether you can see it or not. So we don't build stuff and say, well, we don't care because that's going to get covered up. Everything has to be nice. But where I'm going with this is up top, the pattern doesn't really make any sense. But if you get underneath the car, you've seen that I've taken each one of these panels that I've put into it and I've actually framed them in the chassis. The chassis and the body, how I paint that, the juxtaposition between all those things is how the car is going to show when it's all said and done. So although this will be pretty, really what I'm trying to be cognizant of is if the car's up and it's got mirrors underneath it or it's just up on a lift, how does that show? And I showed you guys in those pictures earlier of what it looks like. So when I get all done with this, I'll throw it up on the lift, get it up, and you'll be able to see all the patterns the way they're supposed to be framed within that beautiful chassis that we've got. And then I'm also laying out how the exhaust and the trans and everything is going to lay out there. So you're not just thinking of building the car in terms of like body work and what looks pretty, but you're also thinking in every single detail, how it shows. Everything needs to be symmetrical and pretty and well thought out, right? So thoughtful engineering is the key to making beautiful cars.